is Alyssa Woodard, and I am a family social science major and youth studies minor. So I decided to study experiences of homelessness from youth through some of my friends that I have who were homeless in their youth. My rhetorical situation was that I was a youth researcher for the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless. In the past year, Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless has won two big policies. So the first one was last spring of 2013, the Homeless Youth Act, which allowed for homeless youth grant. So the government is federally funding homeless shelters and services specifically for youth. And then about this month, on April 2nd, the Affordable Housing Bond Bill passed the House with a supermajority vote, which was 60%. And the Affordable Housing Bond is a part of a bigger bill that was for $1 billion, but the affordable housing sector is for $100 million. And that funding will go directly to creating more youth shelters here in the Twin Cities, as well as family and housing services around the state. And so this is a very relevant issue because 46% of our homeless population here in the state of Minnesota are under the age of 21. And Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless, we have over 110 different community organizations as members, and out of those over 110, only about 4 of them are specifically for youth. So this is a very big need. We need more shelters and more services for homeless youth specifically. The research question that I had was, keeping in mind that there are a diverse range of causes to youth homelessness, what are the dimensions of hope that can motivate youth to improve their situation? So I was interested in looking at not just what brought youth into this situation that they were currently in, but also how they got out of it. My hypothesis was that spirituality would be a pretty big influence, and that was one thing that kind of kept them motivated and kept them hopeful throughout their situation, as well as relationships and support, whether that be from the community or different shelters or organizations in place. One issue that I ran into throughout my research was the actual definition of homelessness and youth homelessness. There was no specific definition, so I based my research off of these two approaches. The broadband approach is more so looking at youth who might not be a typical, people might not typically align them with homeless, such as runaways or people who have gotten kicked out of their house, but they might be living with friends or staying in hotels and might have roofs over their head for the majority of the time, but are still considered homeless because they don't have a home through, a constant, predictable home. And then the narrow band approach is like a street kid, that's what the terminology uses, and so they are living predominantly on the streets every night. In my research triangle, I looked online to find the information about the current policies. So the Youth Homelessness Act, I found that information on the government website and exactly what that entailed, as well as the bond bill. I had to look at current newspaper articles because it is so new from earlier this month. There wasn't an actual government bill passed yet as far as the funding, because they still have to figure the exact details out. My print sources were 2 books. I could only find 2 sources from past research on homeless youth, and both of them were from the 90s. So one was 1993, the other was 1997. So it kind of shows how this issue hasn't been looked at recently, but obviously it is very prevalent because almost half of our homeless population here in the state are youth. And then for the empirical sources, I did 3 different interviews to kind of get the stories of people who have been homeless as youth. And so I did 2 in-person interviews and 1 over the phone. One of the individuals who I talked to She is now a doctoral nursing student here at the University of Minnesota, and she was homeless from age 12 to 16 here in Minneapolis. She would be considered a street kid based on her the fact that she slept outside in the streets most often. And she, because of her experience growing up, wanted to kind of give back to her community. So as a nurse, she has been working at different street outreach programs and youth shelters here in the Twin Cities. And so it was really interesting to talk to her, as well as the two youth are friends of mine who have been homeless, but both of them were, one of them was a runaway and the other was, they just didn't have stable housing. And so questions that I asked them were organizations that they were familiar with, people who might have helped them or hurt them throughout their process, as well as timing, like how long were they homeless, how long were they on the streets, are they still having these issues. And common themes that I found throughout my research was that a lot of homeless youth lack trust in adults. This is a really big issue because a lot of the individuals who are working and who will be working at our shelters and our new youth shelters are going to be adults. So this is one bridge that we kind of have to learn how to cross as an organization, and relationships are crucial to that process. Building those relationships comes through having authentic conversations with these youth, actually listening to them and hearing their stories, because a lot of times youth have been hurt by adults, whether it be their family or different organizations such as foster care or social services. And so a lot of the youth that I talked to also had a sense of community, as well as in the books they talked about having that sense of community is very important for these youth, because they need someone to rely on. A lot of times they're in survival mode and just trying to find their next meal and make it to the next day. And different senses of community are the people that they sleep with at night, as well as gangs. That's a type of community where they support each other. And then one thing that I found was very interesting, spirituality. Through my interviews, two of the youth were were adamant about their spirituality and how it affected them and how it kept them hopeful. But then the woman who was homeless in her youth, she said that she was too naive, too focused on trying to live her life, that spirituality wasn't important to her at all. So it's kind of conflicting on that level. And that's all. Are there any questions about my research? Yeah.
You said that 46% of the homeless are youth. What age or age range has the most, if you found that?
I didn't find a specific outline of ages, but I do know that there are probably I want to say it was between 20 or 30% of the homeless population are also youth under the age of 21 who also have kids of their own. So that's kind of a big deal as well. Yeah.
Do you know from that percentage of youth, what percent of them fall under the broad or the narrow definition of homelessness?
It's really difficult to tell for the broad-based definition, just because they aren't necessarily on the streets, and a lot of times the information that I got came from a Wilder Founder study, and they do the studies, they run them every 2 years, and usually it's more street outreach and looking at shelters and the numbers in shelters. So a lot of the broader based numbers are kind of also speculation, because they know that the small number of people who are in shelters and who are on the streets is not actually representative of the whole homeless youth population. So, yeah.
Looking forward, what further action or research would you potentially look to take?
I would look at violence faced by youth on the streets and how you can start preventing that. I know that there are a lot of different violent situations out there, and it ranges from sexual trafficking to just gangs, and it's one thing that there's such a big spectrum and so many angles that you could kind of like go at, but there's not really any implications in place. But also I would look at evaluating the youth homeless shelters and services that we have right now, and what has been successful, what hasn't been successful, and how can we replicate those successful aspects further. So all right, thank you.